Hey there guys. So at this point you might be noticing two things. One, that this asset looks different than the previous chapters, and also that this render has shadows and things like that in it and it looks pretty good. The reason why is because I am inside of the Iray, right? So this button here. If you just press the snapshot button you'll get into it, and if you press it again you'll get out of the Iray renderer. So again, what I've done is I've so far just applied materials onto this asset, and if I tried tumbling it actually takes a bit of time to navigate around, just get going. But once you're in there, once you're moving around, it's actually not so bad. And so anyway, so yeah, I've basically been applying materials to this object and trying to kind of find a look for this asset. So that's pretty much what we're going to be doing over the next few chapters, is doing that, and at the same time maybe developing even a smart material or a few of them that we can then reuse on other parts of the model, right? So creating our own presets. So let's get to it. So here I am, back more or less to where I was in the previous chapter, and all I've done is I've just loaded up the previous file. And the first thing I will do here is I will go into the texture set settings rather, and bake textures, and I'm going to go and select 512 by 512, and I will bake all texture sets. I know I said before that I wouldn't do this, but in this case the reason why I'm going to do this is because at the very least it's not going to increase my file too much. It's actually going to bake pretty fast because the file size is so small, right? Or rather the resolution is so small. And when I apply my materials right after, it'll give me the exact look that the material is meant to give me, right? Because if I don't have baked materials and I start applying these, then I'm not going to get the look that I necessarily want. Some materials will work just fine, but a lot of them won't. So not to waste my time, I will bake all texture sets and resume when it's done. And now that it's done baking, we can actually start applying the materials to these objects. So now let's go over to the texture set list and click on 1001, being the first UDIM in our list, and we're going to work our way downwards through all these objects and apply materials to them. So if I go over to the texture set list and I click on the visibility button, you'll notice right away that, well, in this case, nothing much is happening inside the viewport. And that's because we can't actually see this object. It's hidden away. Now you can try to navigate and see what happens when you do that, but it's not going to really do all that much for you. So go into the solo button, and that's going to isolate that object. And now we can see the exact object that we're going to be working with. And this way you can go down the list and work on the individual objects. The negative downside to that is that you can't see everything all together. But then you have the all button, and then you can always go back to see how those materials look relative to all the objects around them. But in this case right now, I'm just going to go to solo and apply a material. So I have created a smart material called MK Steel Armor, and if I apply it to this object, you'll notice something like this. And I'll go into how to create these smart materials presets later on. But for now, I'm just going to apply the shaders onto the objects. And right away, you might notice something here, and that is that it didn't apply it to all the objects. Now, if I look at the layers, right, and I look at the masks, and I just hover over some of these masks, this looks okay, because there's pretty much a value almost everywhere on this map. This one is empty. I might want to fix this one here. And then a steel armor clean, it doesn't have all the parts onto it. I mean, you can see like right around the middle, one of the objects is actually missing. Actually, a few of them are missing. So I'm going to click on this mask here, and then I'm going to go over, if you follow my mouse, over into this icon, the polygon fill. I'm going to select and drag across the viewport until those faces are actually added to this mask. And as you can see now, if I go over this mask looks quite different from what it did before. So anytime you have anything missing like that after you apply a smart preset that you might have generated for another asset altogether, then just know that, you know, this will work, right? You can always fix it by just going to polygon fill and fixing the masks. So now I'm going to go to asset number 2, or 1002 UDIM, and this object already had all the materials applied to them, and it seems to be working just fine here. I mean, I'm going and navigating around it, and it's working. And then number 3, once again, I'm going to apply this preset and then see if it works. And in this case, the mask didn't actually work properly. So once again, I'm going to go into this here and apply the polygon fill. So I'm just going to stay in this tool, right? So the polygon fill is always active so that I can go through these assets, add the material like so, and then fix in this mask. I can fix the selection if it needs fixing. This one I think is going to break again, so I will once again apply the material. And yep, there's some white parts which I did not expect, so I go into this mask, apply the material to it, and it's all good. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have to do for this part of the process is select materials, drag and drop them, go into, now remember that if I select the base smart material, I get absolutely no properties. So if I want to change the color of this object, I have to expand first, go into the layer that has the color, so in this case the plastic base, click on that, go into the properties, find the base color, and then change the color that you want, and then any kind of properties that you might want to change as well, right? So I might want to change the roughness in this case. Maybe I'll keep it relatively shiny, but then there's also a part of the object that has more, more roughness to it, and that's of course added to the roughness grunge, and so I can change that right there. So now once again, there's some cleaner parts, there's some dirty parts. That's all good. And yeah, so I'm pretty much going to do that. Now, some parts of it, right, of this asset, will have other materials applied to it, like, for example, these caps here, but I'll be doing that a little bit later. For now, I am only interested in adding materials onto these, like this, right? So a single color, single smart material, and then just changing the colors to whatever it is that I want, and, getting the asset filled. So once again, I'm going to do that, expand the group, go into the paint. Now in this case, the base metal materials are over here, and then the paint layer is added on top. So again, we'll be creating these materials from scratch, or at least a few, by ourselves later on. Now if I go into all at this moment, you'll notice that this asset looks like this. So we have a bunch of materials already applied, and I'm just going to work my way through the rest of the asset very quickly. So once again, just keep going down the list of objects until you're done. Again, if you're not sure about exactly which UDIM it is, go into solo mode inside the texture set list and keep working, right? So keep dragging and dropping these materials. And anytime something doesn't work, right, just fix it by using the polygon fill tool. So again, select this, polygon fill tool, go over it, and you're good to go to the next piece, right? Again, drag and drop, select mask, fix if it needs fixing. And then again, make sure to experiment with some of these materials in case something doesn't work. And where am I? So whenever you lose track of an object, right, like this, and you can't seem to find the object, press F on your keyboard and you're going to frame the asset. And so on this one, I think I'm going to use the steel painted. Right, so when I expand this, you can see that there's, again, more than one layer, and I can always go to any one of these, coatings or dust or whichever, and then change up the look of it just by doing something like that, by affecting the mask. Right, so maybe I want to do something like that, but that's not going to work very well. Now, here's the thing. When I'm using the polygon fill, for the most part, I'm using the UV portion, right? So what it really is doing is I'm painting sort of like with a paintbrush, right? So instead of using a paintbrush and painting onto an object like this, right? What I'm really doing is I'm automatically filling by just clicking on something, right? So in this case, if I drag and drop with this rectangle, I am filling those squares, right? So those polygons. But I'm filling it based on the UV chunk, okay? So if you, for example, have an object that has a UV chunk connected, then then that's easy. But if I select the mesh fill, I can select that and just click it once, and it'll apply. So it's a little bit easier, right? This way it's going to apply to this individual object, and only this mesh, right? So, for example, this piece here is actually disconnected from this. So when I click on it, it applies to that piece only. And again, I can do that here, I can do that here, And now here's the thing about this polygon fill. So if I go and choose a different value over here, right now, whenever I select a mesh and I click, I'm painting a value of white onto this mask, right? If I click this to black and I click on this, right, it's actually going to reverse that effect. Now I can choose any color in between, right? So I can have any kind of variation of that mask, right? So in this case, it's a dust layer, right? So maybe there's just enough dust on here to make this a little bit rougher, right? And I could apply the same thing here. So I have some variation at the very least in this material. And yeah, now I'm usually going between this mesh one here, mesh fill, and UV chunk fill. So any one of these will work. And then again, remember that this value is really just applying a certain value to this mask. So I can apply a black value, right? And it's going to, as you can see, there's a little black chunk, right? And or I can just do this and click that. And now it's going to change that chunk to a white chunk, as you can see on the bottom left corner, right? And once again, it updated that. So yeah, so I mean, like if you want to get some variation for parts, use the polygon fill. And this is actually what we're going to be using for some of the wires later on. And again, if you lose track of your object, press F, and you're going to be back exactly where it is that you want. And again, I'm just going to drag and drop these materials, and eventually I'm going to go back and retweak some of these. Maybe I'll completely apply different materials altogether. But for now, I'm just interested in getting any kind of color on here that will not exactly even meet my requirements or like what it is that I need to do. But for the most part, get something in there that I can start tweaking and hopefully refining this asset until it reaches a point that everybody can be happy with, including me, myself, and the person that I'm making this for. So on some objects like this, I'm going to want to refine a lot more, right? Because there's many objects here and they have many colors. And I'm actually going to be using the polygon fill like I did before, but I'm going to have to construct a much bigger material. And I'll be doing this a little bit later. For now, all I want to do is I want to just go back into some of these plastics and apply them, and then just change the color for them. All right, so click it to the top of the layer stack, expand it, go into the plastic base, and change the color, right? So in this case, I want something greenish, like that. And in this case, I think there might be more than one color, maybe. Okay, so there's this, and then there's the dust. Okay, so this works for me. All right, next object up, this one here. Again, fill it with the material, and once again it has failed because this mask is not complete. So back into the polygon fill, apply it to all those objects, and you're pretty much good to go. Now right now you might have noticed that it actually applied, but it applied the wrong color because I am in black, right? So I need to make sure that this is white and apply this again, and now you have the actual material being applied to the object. And if you go over your mask again, it applied it to all those objects and everything's all great. So keep going until you're done. And I think I'm going to time-lapse or fast forward through some of this, because really I'm going to be doing the same thing over and over again until I'm done going through my entire texture set list. Okay, and I think this object here is going to fail also, right? So if I select that, you notice at the bottom is all filled up, but then again, if I look at the mask, there's some missing pieces. So once again, I click it, I select those pieces, and now we're good. And sometimes you might want to increase the texture resolution. For example, this is one of the bigger objects, so I might want to go into 2048 and see how it looks when it's a little bit more refined, right? And maybe sometimes you might want to make a little slight tweak, because right now, for example, these edges are really big. So going into some of these masks, you might want to edit them, right? So go, for example, into this AO dirt, go into AO, and see what happens when you start to increase the intensity, right? Over here and over there. And yeah, just refine the look that you are going for. Again, I'm not going to be, I'm hoping that you guys aren't making exactly what I'm making, because I'm not providing the asset for you guys. But what I'm hoping that you guys are getting out of this entire lesson is how some of the tools work, how this workflow of look deving works, and some of the tools like, for example, the polygon fill and how that tool works. for objects like this, you might have a harder time to actually tweak, right? As you can see right now, the main cylinder is not working out for me, so you're going to have to add a paint node. And of course, in order to do that, under this paint here, right, if I go into the layers, steel painted, right, the bottom materials, as you can see, are right here, right? So this is what makes up the main steel material, and then this is the steel details, right? So it handles the bump maps. And on top of that, we have the paint color. And we have two layers here that deal with applying the paint mask to this object. Now here's the thing, if I try to go into the mask generator here, the MG mask editor, I can try to tweak this, you know, as much as I want, but you might notice that I can't actually get this part of the object filled for some reason, right? I mean, I can sort of do that, but then it kills off all the extra edges that I might actually want to keep. So again, I'm going to try to do something to make it work. But again, I'm having a really hard time getting this thing filled up. So when I go on top of this, okay, and I go onto the mask and I press, or I right click, and I add paint, I can actually manually paint things as I wish, right? So, and this will also give me the color value, much like the polygon fill. Actually, no, wait, I'm still in the polygon fill tool. So I have the paint tools selected, and I'm going to go into the brush tool, and by control right clicking, I'm going to change the scale of the brush, and I'm going to very simply paint a value that I might want. In this case, I don't want to be painting out the paint, I want to paint in the paint. And in the properties, you have all the brush properties, right, that you've selected. So anytime you select a tool, or anytime you select a layer, you'll get the properties over here. So in this case, I'm going to select the paintbrush, and I'm going to change this grayscale value from black all the way to white. And now when I paint on this node, just remember that much like layers, right, that stack, the filters or any one of these generators, anything here, so if I add a generator, paint, fill, levels, they all get applied to those individual items, right? So I could apply it to either the polyfill, or I could add it to a mask. Now they also add, or rather they stack just like the rest of the layers do, right? So I have the MG mask editor, then I have a warp, and then on top of that I have a paint. So the paint, especially when it's set to normal, is actually going to replace the color below. So again, I'm going to click on that. I'm going to make sure it's nice and white. Click on the paint, and paint back the color that I might want for this object. And then I could refine the color from there, right? So control left click and just paint this object in. So that's if you want, you know, that kind of look, right? If you want that level of control, you can do that at this point, or you can do it a little bit later on. For the most part, what I wanted to do is just apply single colors, but because I wasn't able to do that, I decided to work it out this way. Now, you don't necessarily need to use the paintbrush. I could actually still use the polygon fill, right? And I could do the same thing. I could just simply click on that, and that will work, right? So just know that you don't necessarily have to use the paintbrush at this point. You could just use the polygon fill, and you'd be good to go to the next part. And of course, now I have here the next object that is exactly the same as the previous one, and I'm going to do the exact same thing here. Drag and drop the material, change the value, and once I get to this point, I'm going to select the paint, right click, add the paint, and then inside the polygon fill, I'm just going to select the objects that I want to paint and give it a nice white value too, so that way it's going to have only one material and it's not going to be affected by any means. Now again, I could add another layer, another mask editor on top of that, and maybe isolate some of these edges and maybe add some, or mask out some of these edges and add some more of these worn edges. I could do that later on, right? For now, I just wanted to make sure that I filled this with white and then keep some of the steel parts separate, so that way it's going to create a little bit of contrast as far as this object goes. And again, if you want to see how it's looking so far, as you can see right now, I have white, steel, white, and again, go to all, see how it's looking so far. So every now and then you should be really previewing your asset, right? Don't only be working inside of solo mode because you might create a bit of a mess, right? I mean, there's going to be too many different colors. And I've kind of decided that, you know what, I want to keep only the orange in this case, and some steel parts and white. So I'm kind of isolating it to 3 colors, and then there's going to be the blackish or darker solar panels. So I'm trying to limit myself to only a few colors without having to overdo it. Now some parts will have like wire colors like RGB, right? So red, green, and blue, but that doesn't really hurt me because of the fact that what do you call it? It's such a small part on this model, right? So I am going to have some colors that will differentiate from the overall look, but it's not going to be big and in your face. It's going to be localized at a much tinier level. So once again, I selected this object. I don't know which one it is, so I'm going to go into solo mode and start applying some of these materials to them as well.